Good morning, everyone. In today's Rollo Devo, we're back in Genesis chapter 40, and we're looking at that for the next few Devos to start out this week. So last week, we only looked at the first 8 verses of this story. And in that, we saw that Joseph knew he could trust God in his circumstances, and that freed him to focus on others. Since we've put our faith in Jesus, we can do the same thing. Now, today, we're only going to look at something that I skipped over in the first 4 verses of this passage. But I skipped over it last Saturday for a particular reason. I wanted to start out this week of Devos with this. Look at Genesis 40, verses 1 to 4 again. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in the custody of the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in his custody. So last week, I used the story of Shasta in C.S. Lewis's The Horse and His Boy to talk about God's presence with us. But one of the things that story also does is show us something amazing about God's control and work in our lives. One of the major themes in that story is how Aslan has been guiding Shasta's life on a particular path so that he could save Archenland and Narnia from invasion by the Calormen. And so when Shasta is complaining to Aslan about how he thinks he's the unluckiest boy in the whole world and just whining about how he's bad circumstances of terrifying lions getting stuck between the tombs and a desert full of jackals, basically being raised as a slave by a fisherman, Aslan says to him, I was the lion who forced you to join with Aravis. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses new strength of fear for that last mile so that you should reach King Loon in time. And I was the lion, you do not remember, who pushed the boat in which you lay, a child near death, so it came to the shore where fishermen sat, wakeful at midnight, to receive you. From this, Shasta sees that Aslan has been guiding the whole path of his story, each step, and he just didn't know it until now. In fact, at the end of the book, Shasta says to Aravis about Aslan, he seems to be at the back of all the stories. Well, here, God is at the back of Joseph's story. In fact, Joseph doesn't know where it's going, though, either. Remember, famine is coming, so Jacob's family might die, which means the family line of Jesus might die out. So God's guiding Joseph's story to be the right man in the right place at the right time to save the family line of Jesus from famine and save salvation for the whole world. And we've seen some of his steps along the way already that are obviously God's guidance, and here's another one. In the last chapter, in 39:20, it says, the place where king's prisoners were confined. That's where Joseph was put. Because Joseph was a slave of Potiphar, he got to be placed in the prison where the king's prisoners were placed. And then who shows up? The baker and the cupbearer get placed there under Joseph's care. Joseph needs to come to the attention of Pharaoh, so that eventually he can rise to power under Pharaoh. Here, he interprets dreams of 2 men who have the ear of Pharaoh, 2 people who will come into contact with Pharaoh later on. Well, actually, only one of them will. But the cupbearer later on will remember that what Joseph did when Pharaoh needs a dream interpreted. God is at the back of this story, guiding it. It's another step in the story. Now, at the time, Joseph doesn't know this. He doesn't know where this path is leading, just like Shasta didn't know where his path was leading at the time either. But at the end of the book, he could look back on it and he could say in Genesis 50:20, he said this to his brothers, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. He sees, like Shasta saw, that God is at the back of his story, at the back of all the stories, guiding them for his good purpose in the world, for the purpose of his people. Right now, you can't see where your path is going. None of us can. But Jesus is at the back of our story and at every back of everyone else's stories. He's guiding your path for his good purposes in the world and for his people. Maybe one day we'll be able to look back on all this time and say, now I see why, as Joseph could do. But even then we won't see it all. Even Joseph didn't see the whole reason why God was doing what he was doing in the famine and in his life. He thought he was just keeping a civilization alive. He didn't know he was saving the family line of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, from death. Salvation to the world came because of what God did through Joseph. But Joseph didn't know that. There may be more going on here than we will ever see, but we can trust Jesus, who is at the back of all our stories. So you guys think about that, and I'll see you again tomorrow.